I remember that night like it was carved into my bones. I had just come out of surgery, still weak, stitches pulling at my skin with every breath. The sterile smell of the hospital clung to me, the fluorescent lights burning my tired eyes. My son, James, and his wife, Amanda, stood at the edge of my bed, scrolling through their phones, as if my pain were nothing more than background noise. When the nurse asked, "Who's driving your father home?" James didn't even look up. He chuckled and said, "Not us. We've got dinner plans." My heart clenched harder than the incision on my chest. Amanda smirked, brushing imaginary dust off her designer bag, and added, "He'll figure it out. He always does." My own son, my flesh and blood, leaving me stranded after surgery like I was some stranger. I sat there, dizzy from anesthesia, watching them walk out the door while I begged silently, my voice too weak to carry. That night, I realized something. They thought I was powerless. They thought old age had made me useless, disposable. But what they didn't know was that I had one last fight in me, one last chance to remind them who I really was. And that night, the night they abandoned me, I began planning a revenge they would never forget. I wasn't always this weak, gray-haired man that people look through as if I don't exist. No, once I had strength in my bones, pride in my chest, and hands that could bend steel without trembling. I was a father before I was anything else, and when my wife passed away far too young, I had no choice but to become both mother and father to my son, James. I still remember standing by her grave with a 12-year-old boy clutching my hand so tight his fingernails dug into my skin, his tears soaking through my jacket. That night I promised him, promised her, that I would never let him feel abandoned. I kept that promise with every breath I took, even when it nearly broke me. I worked the steel mill for over 30 years, double shifts that left me limping home at midnight, my body screaming, my hands raw. I remember walking through the door, the smell of grease and smoke clinging to me, only to find James asleep on the couch, with his schoolbooks scattered around him. I'd drape a blanket over his small frame, whispering, "I'm here, son, always here." Then I'd collapse into bed only to wake up before dawn and do it all again. I lived off coffee and whatever cheap meals I could scrape together because every extra dollar went to him. New shoes for basketball, piano lessons he only tried for a year, the class trip to Washington, D.C. I wanted him to have more than I ever did, even if it meant I had less. Holidays were the hardest. When other families were gathered around long tables, I stood in the kitchen with one pot on the stove, stirring a stew that stretched just enough for two. But James never complained. He'd slurp it up, grin at me with those big eyes, and say, "Best dinner ever, Dad." Those words made all the aching in my back worth it. I gave him the best I could, even when it meant I went without. I wore the same boots for 10 years, patched them up with duct tape we'd do, and the soles split, just so he could have a decent jacket for the winter. There were small joys, too, moments that kept me going. Teaching him how to ride his bike in the cracked parking lot behind our building. I can still hear his laugh as he wobbled, then finally took off on his own, shouting, "Look, Dad, I'm doing it." The pride I felt that day could have lit up the whole block. Then there were his baseball games, me standing at the fence, clapping until my palms stung, even when he struck out 3 times in a row. To me, he was always the star player. I missed meals to buy him that bat, worked weekends to pay for his uniform. Seeing him out there with his team, it was worth everything. As he grew older, the sacrifices didn't stop. I worked myself to the bone to pay for his college tuition. Every overtime shift, every calloused finger, every sleepless night, it was all for him. I skipped vacations, never traveled, never remarried, because raising him came first. When he graduated, I sat in the crowd with tears streaming down my face, clapping so hard my hands shook, thinking, I did it. We did it. He never knew that the suit I wore that day came from a thrift store, altered by a kind neighbor because I couldn't afford new clothes. But I didn't care. All I cared about was him walking across that stage, his name being called. When he met Amanda, I welcomed her with open arms. She was polished, well-dressed, from a family that never knew the kind of hunger we knew. I tried to be good to her, too. I helped them with the down payment on their house, even though it drained the last of my savings. When Amanda wanted fancy furniture, James turned to me, and I quietly handed him the money I had tucked away for emergencies. They didn't ask where it came from. They didn't want to know how many nights I sat in the dark, eating canned beans, just to make sure they were comfortable. But here's the thing. I never minded. At least, not then. Because I thought this was what family was about. Giving, sacrificing, loving without asking for anything in return. I thought that when the time came, when my body finally gave out, I could lean on them the way James once leaned on me. I thought he'd remember the nights I stayed awake with him when he had fevers, the mornings I walked him to school even when my legs ached, the afternoons I cheered from the bleachers while other fathers didn't bother to show. I never remarried. I never brought another woman into the house because I didn't want him to feel like he was second place to anyone. Loneliness became my companion, but it was a sacrifice I accepted. Every time I came home to an empty house, every time I ate dinner alone, I told myself it was worth it if James was happy, if James had the life I never could. My joy came from his joy. My pride came from his successes. So you see, I wasn't some useless old man. I was a father who gave everything, his youth, his money, his health, for the boy he loved more than life itself. And that's what made the betrayal cut deeper than any scalpel in the surgeon's hand. Because when the time came for him to be there for me, after all I had given, after all I had endured, he wasn't. They rolled my bed to the recovery bay, my throat still raw from the anesthesia tube, and the world looked like it was underwater. The nurse smiled kindly and said, "Your ride should be here soon, sir." Like it was a certainty, like family would always show up. I nodded because I believed the same lie. I pressed the call button and asked for my phone. My hands were trembling as I opened the old flip. I dialed James first. He answered with music in the background. "Hey, Dad, you good?" "I'm awake," I whispered. "They're discharging me. Can you drive me home?" Silence for a beat. Then, "Tonight?" "James," I said, confused. "It's today. The surgery was today." In the background, Amanda laughed and said, loud enough for me to hear, "We have reservations. Tell him to Uber." Shock hit me first like a cold hand on the back of my neck. I can't take an Uber," I said. "I'm dizzy. I can barely stand." "Dad," James said, exhaling like I'd inconvenienced him. "You'll be fine. Nurses can help you get to the curb." "The curb?" I repeated, the words scraping my chest. Amanda took the phone. I could hear it in her voice. "Mr. Miller, this is why we told you to reschedule the surgery. You never listen." "It was my heart," I said. "They couldn't wait." "Well," she said, sugar turning to steel, "we can't cancel a table for 8 at Vento." She was laughing again before she handed the phone back to my son. Disbelief came next. Sticky, stubborn disbelief that made me say, "You're joking, right? James, please. I'm your father." "Dad," he replied, lower, like he was being reasonable. "It's not a big deal. Just grab a taxi. I'll swing by tomorrow." "Tomorrow," I repeated, like a fool trying to understand a word I'd known my whole life. "Yeah, tomorrow." Then the call ended. The nurse came back, hope in her eyes. "Are they on the way?" I swallowed, felt something drop inside me that wasn't a stitch or a heart, just the last bit of pride sliding off its hook. "No," I said. "They have dinner plans." Her face flinched. "I'm so sorry." "I'm sorry too," I whispered, and I wasn't talking to her. They wheeled me to the lobby, a place full of arrivals and reunions, flowers, coats, laughter, and it made me feel small. I watched the sliding doors open and close like a mouth chewing me up. A janitor looked at me with the kind of pity that hurts worse than anger. I called again. No answer. I texted, "Please, I need help getting home." The 3 gray dots danced, then disappeared. Another text came in from Amanda's number. "We can't keep doing this. You're an adult. Use a ride app." I stared at the words until the sentence blurred. I typed, "I don't have the app. I have the old phone." No reply. A different nurse tried to call them from the hospital line. She was firm, kind, the way professionals are when they smell something rotten. She hung up and said carefully, "They said you should take public transportation." I laughed, a short, broken sound. Public transportation. After heart surgery. She put a blanket over my shoulders. "Let me see if social work can arrange a ride." While she stepped away, I sat there alone, with the humming lights, and the click of heels, and the hollow place where my son should have been. Sadness rose like a tide, slow, heavy, swallowing. It brought memories with it, cruel and sweet. His first bike, his busted lip, me holding him while he cried for his mother. I had been there for all of it. He was not here for this. The social worker came back, cluttered with forms. "We can arrange a voucher," she said, "but it might take some time." "Time," I said, glancing at the clock that didn't care. She offered water. I couldn't taste it. Called again. Voicemail. I left one more message, voice shaking. "James, it's me. I'm at the front. Please come." I waited because fathers always wait. A security guard drifted close, like I might be a risk, like a man abandoned in a hospital chair could be trouble. Humiliation warmed my face. I stood slowly, the stitches tugging like fishhooks. No one stopped me when I shuffled to the automatic doors. The night air slapped me and I almost folded. I clutched the plastic bag with my pills like a lifeline. A bus hissed to a stop across the street, and the universe, indifferent, kept moving. I went to the curb anyway. My phone buzzed. A text from James. "Dad, stop making this dramatic. We'll check tomorrow. Don't guilt trip us." The word dramatic landed like spit on my shoes. I typed back with clumsy thumbs. "I can't walk far. Please." The message sat there, blue and naked. A rideshare pulled up for someone else. I watched a young couple fold into it laughing. Another text arrived, Amanda again. Also, about the house. "You should consider selling soon. A condo with assisted living would be better." Greed jabbed its elbow into the ribs of my grief. So that was it. They wanted me smaller, cheaper, easier to ignore. I thought of the down payment I'd given them, the loans I'd repaid when James forgot, the furniture Amanda picked with my card. My heart didn't hurt from stitches anymore. It hurt from arithmetic. Debits, debits, debits. I dialed one more time. He answered, voice low, probably at the table, napkin across his lap. "Dad?" "Son," I said, and my voice sounded like a stranger's. "I am outside the hospital in the cold." He sighed, long and theatrical. "Dad, we've talked about boundaries." "Boundaries?" I repeated, like I was learning a joke too late. "I can't keep running every time you need something," he said. "I needed you this once," I whispered. "This once." Amanda chimed in, her voice near the speaker, bright as a knife. "James, end this. He'll be fine." He did. The line went dead, and with it something else inside me. Anger came last, hot, clean, clarifying. It didn't roar. It settled. It made space. It said, "Remember this exact minute. The door that didn't open. The son who didn't come." I straightened as much as my stitches allowed and took one step, then another, toward the bus stop. A car honked. I kept moving. At the bench, I lowered myself like a man setting down a heavy history. A boy offered me his seat and called me sir. Kindness from a stranger felt like a bandage over a bullet hole. I thanked him and stared at my shaking hands. I thought, this is what abandonment looks like. It looks like me, in a hospital bracelet, waiting for a bus. It looks like texts about selling my home. When the bus finally coughed up to the curb, the driver looked at me and said, "Rough night?" I nodded. My son had a reservation. He winced, said nothing more, and lowered the ramp. I climbed aboard with the dignity I could salvage. The city rolled by, indifferent and honest. At home, I fumbled with the key like it was a riddle. Inside, the quiet greeted me like a witness. I sat in my old chair and set the pill bag down and let the anger breathe. It filled the room, warmed the air, sharpened my thoughts. I wasn't surprised anymore. I was done being surprised. On the coffee table, a photo of James at 12 smiled up at me like a ghost. I turned it face down. "Enough," I said to the empty room, and the word fit. The betrayal had taken everything soft from the story. What was left would be used. I looked at my hands, old but steady now. I thought of the texts, the calls, the nurse, the curb, the bus, the reservation. I thought of the house they'd already counted as theirs. Humiliation cooled into resolve. Anger learned my name and sat beside me. That was the night my love for my son stopped making excuses for him. That was the night I understood the difference between need and use. And that was the night I began to write everything down. Not just what they did, but exactly how it felt as they did it. Because betrayal isn't a single blow. It's a series of small, sharp cuts that teach you where your edges are. They taught me mine, and I would teach them theirs, starting with the next breath. I sat in my chair that night, the one old recliner with springs that groaned like tired bones, staring at nothing but the shadows crawling across my walls. The pain in my chest wasn't just from stitches, it was from something deeper, something no medicine bottle on my table could touch. I pressed a hand against the scar, but the wound inside me pulsed louder, hotter. At first, I tried to convince myself that maybe James was just overwhelmed. Maybe Amanda pushed him. Maybe this was a one-time mistake. But lies taste bitter in an old man's mouth, and I'd swallowed enough of them in my life. The truth gnawed at me. They didn't forget me. They chose not to come. I looked at the photo on the table. James at 12 years old, holding the baseball bat I'd broken my back to buy him. His smile had once been my reason for everything. But as I looked at that picture, I didn't see my son. I saw a stranger. A man who sat at dinner while his father shivered outside a hospital. A man who let greed and pride replace love. The sadness hit me first, heavy as lead. I thought of the nights I'd eaten stale bread so he could have a hot lunch at school. I thought of the overtime hours, the burns on my hands, the loneliness I swallowed so he would never feel motherless. And what had it all been for? To be left on a seas, herb like a bag of trash. Then came disbelief, cruel and sharp. How had I missed the signs? Amanda's smirks, James's sighs, the way they stopped calling unless they needed something. I should have seen it. But fathers, foolish fathers like me, we see what we want to see. We forgive before the crime is even committed. We excuse the inexcusable because love makes us blind. But grief doesn't stay grief forever. It changes shape. It hardens. The tears that slipped down my cheeks dried into something else. Anger. Pure, clean anger that sat in my chest heavier than any scar. I whispered to myself, enough. Enough. My mind replayed every word, every dismissal. You'll be fine. Call a cab. Stop being dramatic. The way Amanda had texted me about selling my house, as if I were already gone. The way James sighed when I begged for help. Each memory was a coal thrown into the furnace inside me, and soon I felt the fire rising. I leaned forward in that chair, my hands gripping the armrests, and I realized they thought I was weak. They thought age made me harmless, powerless, disposable. But they didn't know me. They didn't know what 30 years in a steel mill teaches a man: patience, endurance, the ability to take pain and turn it into strength. The house was quiet, but my head was loud, loud with promises I whispered into the silence. You will not humiliate me again. You will not use me until I break. You will not leave me in the cold and expect me to thank you later. I stood up slowly, stitches pulling, but the ache was drowned out by the clarity running through me. For the first time in years, I felt something sharp, something alive, not just survival, but purpose. I walked into the kitchen, turned on the single light bulb that buzzed above, and pulled out pen and paper. My hand shook, but not from weakness, from resolve. I began writing, not a letter, but a list. Every sacrifice, every betrayal, every insult. A record that would become my weapon. Because this wasn't just about being abandoned after surgery. This was about every year I gave them my sweat and blood, only to be paid back in neglect. This was about love being treated like currency until the wallet ran dry. I pressed the pen harder until it tore the paper. My voice, hoarse and low, filled the empty room. No more. The photo of James still sat on the table, his boyish grin frozen in time. I turned it face down with one slow, steady hand. That boy was gone. The man he had become would now have to face the man he thought was finished. I breathed in, long and steady, and felt the shift inside me. I was not the helpless patient they abandoned. I was a father with nothing left to lose. And a man with nothing left to lose is a man to be feared. That night, in the silence of my empty home, I made a vow. Not a whisper, not a thought. A vow that carried weight. I gave you everything, I said into the dark. Now you will feel what it's like to have everything taken away. And with that, the grief in me died. What rose in its place was something far stronger, the kind of resolve that builds revenge, one step at a time. When I left that hospital alone, limping with my stitches still fresh, my body aching with every step, I felt weaker than I ever had in my life. But inside, something far stronger than pain was growing. I kept hearing my son's voice in my head. "We don't have time, Dad. You'll figure it out." And his wife's dismissive laugh. That sound was a knife twisting in me, over and over. I knew right then I could never let this stand. But I also knew something else. If I wanted justice, it couldn't be in anger, not in shouting or throwing punches. No, my revenge had to be patient, quiet, and undeniable. So I started planning. The first step was silence. I didn't call my son. I didn't beg. I didn't even complain. I wanted him and his wife to think they'd broken me, that I was just the weak, pitiful old man they imagined me to be. The more they thought I was powerless, the less they'd suspect what was coming. I began keeping notes. Every insult, every cold shoulder, every moment they made me feel like a burden. I wrote it down in a notebook. It wasn't just for memory. It was for fuel. And late at night, when my stitches ached and my heart raced with anger, I would read those pages and whisper to myself, "One day, you'll regret this." The second step was resources. They thought I had nothing left, just an old man's pension and a small savings account. They didn't know I'd been careful all my life, putting away bits and pieces, investing quietly. I had more tucked away than they ever guessed. That money, I decided, wasn't going to be left for an ungrateful son and his greedy wife. It was going to fund something much better, my revenge. But money wasn't enough. I needed allies. I didn't have many friends. Most had drifted away, and some had already passed. But I did have a few people who owed me favors. An old neighbor who used to borrow my tools. A mechanic I once helped cover rent when his shop was struggling. Even a nurse from the hospital who'd seen how my son abandoned me that night. Her eyes had burned with pity as she handed me a blanket. Quietly, I began reaching out, planting seeds, asking for small bits of help here and there. The third step was patience. I had to wait. I had to watch. Revenge is like fishing. You don't yank the line the second you feel a tug. You wait. You let the bait sink deeper until the hook sets itself. So I watched my son and his wife. I noticed how they bragged to neighbors about their independence, how they lived beyond their means, how they leaned on the assumption that one day all my savings and belongings would become theirs. That arrogance was going to be my weapon. I started making quiet arrangements. A lawyer, an old friend I hadn't spoken to in years, helped me draft papers. I moved my accounts, shifted my will, locked things down where no greedy hands could reach them. My son thought he knew everything about me, but he didn't know half. Still, this wasn't just about money. This was about dignity. They had humiliated me, stripped me of respect, left me on the side of the road when I needed them most. So my plan had to sting, not just in their wallets, but in their pride. I wanted them to feel abandoned, to taste the same bitterness they fed me. So I began shaping a scenario. I would give them exactly what they gave me: false promises, silence, and finally, desertion when they least expected it. I began rehearsing my words in my head, picturing the look on their faces when they realized the man they thought was weak had been stronger than both of them combined all along. Every detail mattered: timing, delivery, surprise. Revenge isn't just about getting even. It's about making the other person feel the weight of their cruelty. And so, night after night, I sharpened my plan like a blade, keeping it hidden, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. They thought I was broken. But in truth, I was building. And soon, very soon, they were going to learn that when you abandon someone who gave you everything, that someone might just come back with a reckoning you never saw coming. I didn't just want them to feel guilt. I wanted them to taste the same helplessness I had felt that night, standing in the cold darkness with no ride, no care, no dignity. So when the night of my plan arrived, I stayed calm, as though nothing had ever happened, though inside my chest beat like a war drum. My son and his wife had invited friends over for dinner, and I accepted their invitation with the same quiet, humble tone I always used, the one they mistook for weakness. They thought I was just the old man who sat silently at the corner of the table, forgotten unless they needed me to wash the dishes or watch the kids. But that night I was more than silent. I was calculating. As the guests laughed, drank, and filled their plates with the food I had cooked earlier that afternoon, because of course they asked me to help in the kitchen as if I were a servant, I slipped away. I had left something very important in the car, I told them, and nobody thought twice. Out in the driveway, under the cool glow of the street lamp, I opened my truck and retrieved the small black folder I had been keeping hidden for weeks. Inside were documents, copies of the deed to the house, the savings accounts, even evidence of every dollar I had quietly transferred out of joint accounts they assumed they controlled. They didn't know that all those months they were laughing at me for being useless. I had been moving pieces on a chessboard they couldn't even see. I returned inside, folder tucked under my arm, and waited until the room quieted, until glasses clinked and chatter slowed. Then I stood, something I rarely did, and cleared my throat. "I have something to say," I began, and my voice was sharper than anyone expected. My son smirked at me, whispering something into his wife's ear, probably another joke about how I was always rambling. But then I opened the folder and spread the document. It's across the dining table. The room fell silent. "What's all this?" my son asked, his voice suddenly uneasy. His wife leaned over, eyes narrowing. "This," I said slowly, "is everything you thought belonged to you, but doesn't. The house you live in, the car you drive, even the accounts you dip into every month. Every single thing has my name on it. Mine. And tonight, that changes, because I am taking it all back." Gasps spread around the table, but I didn't stop. I pulled out the transfer documents I had already filed, explaining how I had signed the house over to my name alone, revoked their access to funds, and arranged for a new will that left everything not to them, but to charity and to people who had actually shown me kindness in my life. "You remember that night you left me on the street?" I asked, my voice cracking just enough to remind them of the pain. "That was the night I realized, you don't deserve a thing from me." My son's face turned red. "You can't do this," he barked, but there was panic in his voice. His wife slammed her hand on the table. "After everything we've done for you." "Done for me?" I cut her off, louder than I'd ever spoken. "You mean the nights you laughed at me for being old? The times you told your friends I was a burden? The humiliation of standing in the rain while you drove away in the car I paid for? You've done nothing but strip me of dignity. But tonight you learn, dignity can't be taken when a man finally decides to fight back." As they sputtered, I revealed the final blow. I had already contacted a lawyer and a realtor. In 2 weeks the house would be on the market. Their friends, still sitting in stunned silence, now looked at them differently, not as a perfect couple hosting dinner, but as selfish, greedy people exposed in front of everyone. The humiliation was theirs now. My son stood, trembling with rage. "You'll make it." "Make a mistake, Dad. You'll regret this." I looked him dead in the eye. "No, son. The mistake was ever thinking I was weak enough to let you walk all over me." The guests left early, whispering to each other about what they'd witnessed. My son and his wife shouted, cursed, tried to threaten me. But it was too late. The power had shifted. For once, they had to face what it felt like to be small, helpless, and unwanted. And as I walked out that night, my folder under my arm and my head held higher than it had been in years, I realized something. Revenge isn't about cruelty. It's about justice. They left me stranded once, but this time I left them stranded in the wreckage of their own greed. I remember sitting in my quiet living room after everything had unfolded, the dust finally settling, the house filled with an unfamiliar stillness that almost felt like peace. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying the weight of unspoken pain, disappointment, or the gnawing fear that I was somehow failing as a father. The revenge had been carried out, justice delivered, but it wasn't a celebration. It was a release. I thought back to the night they left me at the hospital, weak and broken, waiting on a bench with nothing but my aching body and my wounded heart. That memory used to burn me alive, but now, instead of rage, there was an odd calm inside me. My son and his wife had tasted the consequences of their cruelty, and though I didn't rejoice in their suffering, I felt a stern sense of balance restored. They had stripped me of dignity, and I had taken back my power. Still, as I sat there, I realized that revenge is never just about payback. It's about closure, about proving to yourself that you are not as powerless as they tried to make you believe. I poured myself a cup of tea, my hands steady for the first time in weeks, and looked at the photos on the wall. Pictures of my late wife, smiling, radiant, alive, in moments we thought would last forever. She would have hated what our son had become, how cold and ungrateful he had turned out to be. A pang of sadness pierced me, because a part of me still remembered the little boy who used to run into my arms after school, whose tiny voice once called me his hero. That boy was gone, replaced by a man consumed with selfishness and greed, molded by choices I couldn't control. And yet, I reminded myself, his betrayal did not define me. What defined me were the years of sacrifice, the endless nights of work, the roof I built over his head, the meals I placed on his table. I was more than his rejection. I was a man who had given, and when pushed to the edge, I was a man who fought back. Neighbors began whispering about what happened, some shocked, others quietly proud that I had stood my ground. For years they had seen me as the quiet old man who kept to himself, who raised his boy with patience and devotion. Now they saw me as someone who refused to be discarded. A few came by to check on me, bringing meals, offering company, and in their kindness I found something unexpected: community. The same people I thought barely noticed me were suddenly there, making me realize I was never as alone as I believed. That was perhaps the sweetest twist of all, that losing my son's false love made room for genuine compassion from others. Still, I'd be lying if I said the revenge healed everything. There were nights when loneliness still pressed down like a heavy blanket, nights when I asked myself whether it all could have been avoided if I had done something differently. But every time doubt crept in, I reminded myself of that night at the hospital, their laughter as they walked away, their cold words echoing in my ears. That memory was my answer. It was never about me not being enough. It was about them choosing cruelty over decency. That realization gave me peace. In the quiet of my home, I vowed to live the rest of my days with dignity, not to waste my remaining years chasing their approval, but to invest in myself, in the people who truly valued me, and in the small joys I had long overlooked. The scent of fresh coffee in the morning, the sound of birds outside my window, the gentle warmth of sunlight on my face. I began to see life as mine again, not theirs to wound or withhold. And so, here is the moral I want to leave behind. Never let anyone, family or not, convince you that your worth depends on their kindness. Love should be a gift, not a weapon. When people show you cruelty, believe them, but don't let them break you. Stand up, even if your hands are shaking, even if your heart is breaking. Revenge may not erase the scars, but sometimes it is the only language the ungrateful understand, the only way to reclaim your voice when they try to silence it. At the end of it all, I am not just the man my son abandoned at a hospital bench. I am the man who walked away from that bench stronger, unbowed, and unwilling to be erased. And if my story means anything, let it remind you of this. Respect is not optional, kindness is not weakness, and those who betray the hand that raised them will one day face the truth. They never deserved it in the first place.